There's something sick about the firearms Americans overwhelmingly choose to defend themselves and their families. The idea we still allow semi-automatic weapons to be purchased is sick. It's just sick. It has no social redeeming value. Zero. None. This is Alan with Quarter Horse Arms, and trust me, that's not my opinion. That was a statement from President Biden on November 24th, 2022. Because everyone still has a burr under their saddle about assault weapons ban. Well, first off, what constitutes an assault weapon? I mean, we can argue that it's a modern sporting rifle, which I'm not a big fan of. I mean, MSR versus AR. I like AR better. And so they have to be banned because they're evil. They cause, massive casualties, etc., etc. And we also have to ban semi-automatic weapons. Trust me, these are not my views. This is the political football that keeps getting kicked around. And again, we're dealing with stupid people. Sensationalism. Are AR-15s horrible? From a shooting perspective, absolutely not. They're great platforms. They're highly adaptable. I wouldn't use the word modular, but you can do a ton of things to these things. They're pretty accurate shooters, and the ammunition compared to larger caliber rifles is much cheaper. And there's very little in the way of recoil. So for my money, it's a perfectly good weapon. And it's also an evil thing because, it's semi-automatic, and those are bad. Okay, so I think it was State of the Union where President Biden says much more must be done to curb gun violence. You know what? Got that 100% correct. We need to curb gun violence. And there's some simple ways, but, there's not a lot of people that want to have the discussion. So I went and did some digging. And the last statistics I found were from the ATF in 2018. So we're going to ban semi-automatic weapons. In 2018, 85% of the handguns manufactured were semi-automatic. From the same report, there were just under 14,000 murders in 2019. 364 of those murders were committed with rifles of all types. The ATF in the report did not discriminate between rifles, shotguns, and I'm putting air quotes in with assault rifles or assault weapons. All right, so 364 people killed with rifles. 600 people were beaten to death. And similarly, there were more people killed with bats and blunt objects than there were with rifles. And even if we go with all 364 murders were done with AR type weapons, which they were not, you got a better chance of getting beaten to death than you do about getting killed with a rifle. Okay, so let's continue. The semi-automatic rifles constituted 2.6% of the firearms used in murders. And then let's continue. The other statistics were things like semi-automatic, the estimates are 50% of handguns are like revolvers and 50% are pistols. 40% of the rifles are semi-automatic, and this is 2019 study. There are about 3.6 million handguns. And let's see, those were, And excuse me, I'm sorry. It was 4.5 million handguns, 3.9 million of which were pistols. 84% of all of those produced were semi-automatic. As were half of all the rifles produced. Now, then we get into even funnier stuff. And, we're looking at, and this is New York City, 1 in 10 murder victims was a confirmed gang member. Also in New York City, 4,500 gun arrests in 2021. So this was done by the NYPD. 1,200 of them were dismissed. And there was one conviction. So out of 4,500 arrests, one conviction. Philadelphia, 61% of the gun cases were dismissed with no trial. So you kind of got to think about the mindset going on here. Okay, then let's go back to New York City because, this is some interesting data. Nearly all murders were killed by a criminal that had a prior record. What a shock. That was 87%. So if I'm doing my math right, it means only 13% were killed by fresh criminals. So with 87% of these guys that had prior records, somebody put them back on the street. And I don't want to get into the debate of, guns don't kill people, people kill people. Well, the reality is that's exactly what happens. And coming out of a state like New York, it's got a huge population, and they haven't got a clue. They're focusing on the wrong thing. And in a lot of the major gun control states, so we're looking at New York, New Jersey, California, and a bunch of other ones that I can't remember off the top of my head because it's getting late. They're having a problem because they're putting the criminals back on the street. So, one of the other things that cropped up with all of this research, and again, some of it is entertaining to me because I'm intrigued by stupidity. Not so much my own, but, other people's. So, in New York State, they had an assault weapon registration. About 1 million AR platforms were estimated to be in New York. They were required to register them, and then every 5 years you had to renew it. 44,000, or 4%, were registered. Basically, what you're looking at is a large civil disobedience. So by forcing law-abiding citizens to have to put themselves in a special category of having to identify that you have guns and register them with the state because, you never know when you might go on a shooting rampage. What about the other 96%? Now, they did, in fact, bring, I think, 11 people to trial because they didn't re-register the guns. So the people that actually said, hey, I got it, and did not or forgot to renew it, were charged with a crime. Not so much the criminals that had the guns, but, that creates, a whole, another batch of problems. So what New York did following Sandy Hook, which, school shooting, for those of you that may have forgotten, they enacted what's called the SAFE Act. It's the Safe Ammunition and Firearms Enforcement Act. And what they were trying to do was you had to get background checked for firearms. Well, that happens anyway. If you're buying a gun from a licensed gun dealer, there is a background check involved. And if you're in North Carolina, like I am, if you have a concealed carry permit, or a concealed carry handgun permit, you've already been background checked. So there's no reason to do that. But then they tried doing a registration for ammunition. Two things happened. One, the system fell flat on its face in the first weekend because they were trying to restrict people to a 100-round purchase. So, not being unintelligent, the legitimate gun owners would go to Walmart and buy 100 rounds, go to the next Walmart, buy another 100 rounds, and just keep doing that over and over again. So the system fell on its face, and the other thing that happened was they were trying to background check it through NICS, and they discovered that's a no-no. You can't background check someone on ammunition. The regulated item is the firearm, not the ammunition that goes with it. The other thing that happened with the SAFE Act was there were a bunch of sheriffs in New York that refused to enforce the law, to their credit. Because now you're trying to criminalize legitimate, legal, law-abiding gun owners. So, in the case of President Biden, my statement is maybe you need some other advisors. I'd make a hell of an advisor. So far, I'm still a Democrat. I know I'm not sounding like it now, but my party is currently disgusting me. And quite frankly, it's because for the last 30 or 40 years, they've been on a whole big thing about gun control. But crime keeps going up. So it's not controlling the guns from the legitimate gun owners. It's the criminals. And why? Is it getting worse? Because we keep putting them on the street. The data is pretty straightforward. When they banned assault rifles in the 1990s, I think it was, under the Brady Bill. And I could be misremembering it. The amount of crime did not go down. The weapons they used changed. So if they couldn't have an AR, they used something else. You have to operate on the assumption that a criminal is not necessarily going to obey the law. That's why they're called criminals. And I know this is my soapbox. It's also my pet peeve. People that are legitimate gun owners, which definitely me and I'm sure a lot of my listeners are as well, they're not doing anything wrong. I'm not doing anything wrong. And what you're doing is telling me that I have to be in a special group by registering my gun somewhere if I'm in New York. Or not being able to take it because I'm going into a sensitive area. They're limiting our ability to exercise our Second Amendment rights. They're limiting our ability to constitutionally carry a weapon. So there's some changing mindsets. Like, for example, the Supreme Court has actually been striking stuff down, and the circuit courts of appeals have been striking gun control stuff down, like the bump stock ban. All right, so that went bye-bye. And frankly, it was done very smartly. With the AR pistols, giving you an opportunity to convert them to a short-barreled rifle, essentially getting a free Class 3 item out of it. There are 26 states that I'm aware of that have brought lawsuits to challenge that. Now, do I think an SBR is better than an AR or AK pistol? The answer is yes. But on one hand, you should be able to have the choice about what kind of weapon you want. So at any rate, so much for my soapbox oratory. But I'm sorry, I am not a Second Amendment gun rights fanatic.